Yeah.
We are live too.
Oh, Craig, are you controlling the slides?
So I should just make a sign?
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to get started. Hello and welcome everyone to today's
Yeah.
webinar and Q&A discussion on artificial intelligence and machine learning powered by Amazon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue, for that lovely introduction. Again, my name is Mark. I'm part of the AWS startups team here in Australia. We are a team of about 22 people now and actually growing a little bit more to support startups and scale-ups and then ecosystem partners in every single state and territory around Australia and New Zealand. Most of everybody on our team is a former founder, so for many of the people here, I actually knew Chris originally when I came to Queensland through the Hot Desk program. So I had my own fintech for 7 years. And that's a pretty common element within the AWS startup team is that most of us have been founders or very early employees in startups. So we know the experience of the hard work that goes into startups, and it's a great joy to then watch these startups get into the scale up and hit the global markets, and that's what our team does. So everything from working with venture capital funds and accelerators to doing events like this, shining the light on our startups is what our team does. So if you are with AWS and you need a little bit more help for your startup, please reach out to our team. My email is very easy to remember. It's iammark@amazon.com. Otherwise, a fantastic job here. Thank you to the AI Hub and to River City Labs for hosting the event and to our wonderful startups, scale-ups, here today to share their journey along AI and ML. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Pauline.
Thank you so much, Mark. And how can I follow AWS? You guys are doing such great work. Really appreciate it. And for any startups in the audience, note to self, I am Mark, I am someone. Great email to start with if you're doing a startup. So well done. So firstly, so excited to be here. General Manager of River City Labs. River City Labs, if you don't know, is a tech incubator located in the precinct in Fortitude Valley, and a leading tech incubator that we promote and support startups and scale-ups to grow and emerge into the markets and do interesting things with technology, and that you're going to hear today. So I would love to firstly introduce who we have on our panel. So firstly, Fast-Scaling Flood Map that has been developing a real-time flood forecasting and mapping, improving emergency management during and after potential floods. We are joined by Juliet Murphy, CEO of FloodMap. Welcome. Internationally acclaimed Movis and their IoT Fit Machine, the world's first self-installed condition monitoring solution. And representing Movis, we have Grady Vincent, Head of Platform. And last but not least, software guru Notiv, who will describe how notepads are put down and replaced by AI to record, transcribe, and summarize business meetings, but so much more. I'm pretty excited, Chris. And hear from Notiv, the founder, Chris Rathke. Welcome, Chris. So we will also hear later on in this session from Leanne Kemp, CEO of Everledger, the amazing Leanne, at the end of the panel. So before we do get started, can I just invite you all, if you do have any questions, to enter them into the chat box. Do not forget, now is your time to ask questions. I'll remind you periodically during the panel, but please save me and just get your questions down because I will be answering them throughout the panel. So without further ado, let us begin, please. So before we kick off, Juliet, I'm going to hand over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also FloodMap?
I'd love to, Pauline. Thank you so much. Is the microphone on?
test the microphone. All good? Great.
Fantastic. If we just move to the next slide, I will tell you a little bit about who we are at FloodMap. So my name, Juliette Murphy, CEO and co-founder of FloodMap. I guess first I just wanted to thank you all so much for having me along on the panel today. A big thank you to the Queensland AI Hub, ACS River City Labs and AWS for putting on this event. It's a pleasure to be here. So I chose this photo to give you a bit of an idea of who we are. I sort of loved it because it shows both of the founders and kind of captures how nerdy and passionate about flooding we both are. So on the right, you'll see my co-founder and CTO, Ryan Prosser here. So Ryan has a lot of experience in managing teams, deploying large-scale software and architecture and data pipelines. And he's also incredibly passionate about solving the problem of flooding. Myself, I worked for 12 years as a water resources engineer specializing in flooding and hydrology, and it was after experiencing 2 large flood events myself and the lack of available warning time that really prompted me to solve this problem. So we set about doing that. And if we just move to the next animation there. From the 2 founders, we've then gone on to raise pre-seed and seed funding, and now grown a team of about 11 people and based here in the precinct. And I love that our team often describes we have such great overlap and multidisciplinary skill sets and collaboration, and some of them mentioned we're like a Venn diagram of skills, and so I wanted to put that on a picture because it really describes who we are. So we have overlap of software, data science, GIS, flood engineering and hydrology, and coastal engineering. So a big shout out to a couple of our data scientists. One of them's here in the room with us today, Robert Wall. He has a background in coastal engineering and also a master's in data science. And also Ed, who has a PhD in computational fluid dynamics relating to bioreactors with a lot of skills that are very translatable to data science and flood engineering. And then we also have Ali Ahmad-Alipour, who has a background PhD in hydrology, as well as a lot of experience in deep learning and AI and machine learning. So an incredibly talented bunch. But I'll tell you a bit about the problem we're tackling. So flooding is becoming more frequent and more severe, and this is impacting critical infrastructure, it's impacting public safety, people, residences, and so many things. And it's projected to get worse. So about 9 billion flood damage in Australia every year, and 80% of this occurs in Queensland. And if we just move to the next button there, a lot of it occurs because flood warnings are simply too broad. So this is showing a typical example of a flood warning in Queensland. As you can see, this one covers 1/3 of the state, and so people just don't understand that themselves or their assets may be at risk and don't have the information to act on it. And that's where hydrology and some machine learning come in to solve this problem. So basically what we do is import a lot of forecast rainfall data, real-time rainfall data, and river height data. And we use this in machine learning and hydrology models to predict river heights at scale, and put this into rapid hydraulic models to produce location-specific flood forecasts of which areas will be at risk, which people can use for streamlined communications and messaging, and to inform situational awareness so that they can take action to prevent that damage with location-specific alerts, for example. So we're super lucky. We have a really talented team tackling this problem, and I'll tell you a bit about where we're on our journey and what we're looking for those in the audience today. We're, as I said, based here in the precinct currently, and we're growing our team. And if you hit that little button, perfect. So right now we're selling into the USA and just brought on our first team member in the US. And we also brought on a team member who's currently in Johannesburg in South Africa. So currently working across 3 continents and around the clock, which is very convenient. And we're proudly supported by Advanced Queensland and the Office of the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, as well as the Department of Industry, Energy and Science as a recipient of the Accelerating Commercialisation Grant. So we are in growth phase, and we're currently looking for any super talented software engineers, particularly with Python and GIS expertise. If you know of anyone at mid-level to senior, please do get in touch.
Fantastic, and a little bit of a plug there for our future enthusiasts who want to join a startup. So thank you so much, Julia. Great, interesting background of your team and where you're actually going. Would love to hear more, I'm sure, as you guys pop in some questions into the chat box. So next on, we're going to go to Grady, and Grady, would love to hear a little bit about you and a bit of a background about your company.
Thanks, Pauline. Movis is a company that's been around for, started in about 2015. The founders, Brad Parsons and Michelle Lamar, started it with an idea to improve the energy efficiency and the cost, the life cycle cost of something like 2.3 billion machines that are floating around the world that sometimes people forget about. So that's the overall picture that we sort of had starting up. I joined in 2017 when we were still part of the iLab incubator at UQ. I came from, somebody dug up from LinkedIn that I came from the University of Tasmania. Seems such a long time ago, but finally made it up to Queensland and have been working with startups for probably the last 6 years since I've been up here. And thankfully most of those have been based in Brisbane, although I'm based on the Gold Coast. So Movis, as you can see there, we've got an office just outside of the CBD. We've currently got around about 25, maybe a couple more full-time employees. We're not quite as diverse as you, Juliet. We've got people from the Gold Coast and down to Sydney and then back up to the Sunshine Coast, so quite a few Queenslanders. Having said that, we've got a Canadian-Irishman working in my team, and we've got a French-Canadian working in the team, as in Michelle, who's one of our founders, so we've got a little bit of an international flavour. The whole key to Movis was trying to provide an end-to-end solution to condition-based monitoring and condition-based maintenance that allows our customers to, as we said, save money, not just in programming maintenance and not over-maintaining, but also to give our customers the opportunity to essentially save power and give them the opportunity to, when we get to failures and those sorts of things, that we can help them to minimise the impact on their business. So we cover a number of areas and try to help our customers to solve these problems in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to do before the type of product that we have and the AI. One of the key things, I think you mentioned earlier, Pauline, was around the self-install. So we've worked really hard on making these little devices easy to install, easy to configure, and to start having an impact on a business as soon as possible. I think maybe we'll nip to the next slide in 1 second. We'll go now. We've got a video just to describe Movis a bit.
FitMachine is a true end-to-end solution for monitoring industrial equipment 24/7, offering all the components to monitor your equipment in real time. The FitMachine is a compact wireless sensor which collects data on vibration, acoustics and temperature to predict machine failure. Comprised of a printed circuit board, battery, rugged casing and a magnet for installation, FitMachines utilise a microphone and accelerometer to continuously collect data. You can easily install the FitMachine using no tools or adhesives. Simply attach it to your equipment using the magnet. There is no need to shut down your equipment. Once installed, onboard the sensor with our mobile FitMachine app. Scan the QR code on your sensor. Then the app will take you through a few simple steps to onboard your FitMachine to the machine cloud. Our machine learning algorithm establishes your equipment's normal operating behaviour, which is then processed and analysed by the machine cloud using artificial intelligence. The machine cloud dashboard gives you full visibility into this behaviour and the health of your equipment, displaying the condition and trend of your equipment degradation over time. When your equipment behaves abnormally, the Machine Cloud dashboard sends alarms via SMS and email so you can determine your course of action. You can either continue monitoring your equipment, wait until upcoming planned downtime, or take action immediately. So there you have it, the Fit Machine, which is simple to install and use, costs less than one inspection visit per month, and provides 24/7 condition monitoring, minimising unplanned downtime and production interruptions. Start monitoring your equipment today. Request a demonstration of Fit Machine.
So I probably should have bought a Fit Machine along, which I didn't, which I'll get into serious trouble for because it's not quite as big as it looks on the screen. But yeah, we've obviously gone through the process of designing, manufacturing, or having manufactured the equipment. We have it manufactured here in Brisbane at the moment. And so that's been part of our process. Our learning process is how to, we've gone through design, a couple of iterations on our hardware. We've then got our AI component, which was really the driving force behind the design of the hardware and the requirements of the hardware to attach to the machine. And then, of course, on top of that, we've got our dashboard, our mobile app, and all the underlying platform stuff that brings all these things together and allows our customers to not just use the dashboard, but to integrate it into their other systems, whether it be a SAP system or a SCADA system. Whatever processes that they have in place, we can help them to bring our Movis information and recommendations into their systems. Currently, we're scaling up, which I think is pretty exciting, but it highlights the fact that there's so many things that we have to think about. We need to look at being able to produce a better AI, a better and faster AI, because we're currently monitoring over 2,000 machines, but in the next 6 months that's going to be 10,000. And if there's 2.3 billion possible machines to monitor, we need to make sure that we can scale, and obviously AWS helps us with that. Aside from that, we manufacture as well, so we've got a lot of challenges around making sure that we can meet demand as we go to 5, 10,000, 100,000 devices. As you can see, they are not massively simple, but they're not overly complicated. But some of the ones that come back from that have been damaged in industry, you wouldn't recognise them. They've got bits falling off. They've got all sorts of ugly-looking, dirty stuff all over them. Some of the plants where they come from are amazing. You wouldn't want to walk in there, which is another reason Fit Machine's good, because you don't have to. So we need to continually improve those parts of our product and our process. I could go on about all those additional scaling issues that we have, but that's where we're at the moment, and we're always looking to bring people in to help us with that, with all of those processes. So, I think that's Movis in a sort of a nutshell.
Awesome, thank you so much, Grady. And a bit of a unique play there, not probably unique enough, but the hardware as well as the software side, quite a challenge on your hand to scale. Love to hear about that very soon. But we're firstly going to go over to Chris, founder of Notiv.
Thank you. So it's quite interesting if you see the Movis story and the FladMap story, and our story is actually not that different. So if we rewind back 20 years ago, I was this delinquent young technologist and observing my mother who worked as a stenographer in the police force. And so the need for Notiv has really grown with me over the last 20 years. And luckily, if you flip over to the other side with my co-founder, Ian, he has a similar story, but it's more on the technology side, where he was in Europe running one of the largest digital meeting room research studies that's ever existed on the planet, and has actually received awards for being one of the most significant studies in the history of digital meetings. So you look at all of those types of technologies, and my own experience, 10 years ago, I said to my mum, I'm going to fix your problem. And I thought I was going to build a little square device that I would wear on my shirt, and that it would be everywhere in the world. And I went and spoke to some people in San Francisco, and they said, you shouldn't build hardware because it's hard, and I'm sure you can attest to that. And so I said, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. And after another 12 months of research, discovered that what was right in front of my eyes the whole time, which was one of the best applications of the type of thing I was looking at, is going back to the actual discussions that these people are having. And what's interesting, if you look at your waking hours, so the time between, say, 7 a.m. and maybe like 9 p.m. at night during the week, 60% of that is spent at work. And what is the most popular thing people do at work? They meet. Whether it's have you got a minute, or have you got a second, or can I borrow you for a moment, or it's on the calendar, that's a meeting. And if you start looking at the types of industries that do that a lot, there is 55 million of those meetings every day in the US, and that's just the US, and that's where we're targeted as a company. So we work in the professional services sector. That's companies that are things like legal, education, financial, and then specifically right now as we go to market, we're targeted in what we call Marcom, which is sort of like people that work creatively to create marketing messages, advertising campaigns for other bigger companies. Because if you look at the user adoption curve described in a book called Crossing the Chasm, when you go to market with anything, you really have to find who are the innovators in your space, who are the people that are looking for solutions, and who are the people that are early adopters of this type of technology. And so at Notive, we're now an 11-strong team distributed across Australia, where we do most of our engineering, very much thanks to the Australian R&D tax concession, and then also Europe and the US, which is more about our go-to-market. So we're lucky. We've tripled our paying customer base in the last 4 months. COVID has been a terrible thing to happen to the planet, but a great thing to happen to the online meeting space. In 3 days, it created 3 months and then a further 3 months of change, which moved the whole world forward 3 years in that little window of time. So anyone who hasn't taken an online meeting, regardless of what you do in the last 3 months, I would ask where you've been. Can we jump to the next slide, please? And if we look at where we're going as a company, meetings are just the start. So there's a lot of work to do, but if you look at how technology has changed and the way we communicate, the way we interact with technology, for the last 60 years, it has progressed from 100 people using one device back to this old school technology called punch cards, all the way through to where now we had a personal computer on a table, and then it became a computer we could carry around. And then it became browsers and the internet, and then it became a phone, a device that we now have in our pocket. And I'm sure everyone knows what it's like to see the little message saying you've looked at your phone for 6 hours today. And the next horizon is voice. And that's why we are so bullish on the meeting space, because it is the single place where we can actually listen to humans and understand what they're talking about. It's more than just let's see how many phones wake up now. Hey Siri, what time is it? That's a great experience to find time, but does it help me in my day-to-day work? And that's the thing that we're focused on at Notive. We want to make the work, the thing you do more than anything else in your waking hours, better. And we start with meetings, so our focus is on meeting better. It's creating the things that you need to be prepared for a meeting before, engaged with your client during the meeting, and to be able to make sure that you can drive the action that's necessary afterwards. That's where Notive comes in. And the next 60 years, all of this is going to change. It's not going to be about how many devices you have or how big it is. It's the idea that that device will hear you and understand you. If we jump one more slide, oh, there we are. And the microphone is just one type of sensor. Movis is sticking them on machines. FladMap, I'm sure, have different ways that they're collecting sensor data in order to be able to predict when people are going to be in trouble. What does it look like to take all of these different sensors and collectively bring it together in what we call ambient intelligence? It's not a, hey, tool, wake up and tell me the time. It is, hey, Chris, you've been in this meeting today. You're about to wrap up. Make sure that you let Mark know that he's buying lunch today. It understands the context of us. It knows that there's a window of time when it's okay to have the camera pointed at us, to have the microphone turned on, to use advanced AI algorithms to know our voice, to recognize, Mark's a little down today compared to normal, or Mark is a little up today, which is always the case, and be able to bring that together to actually help us in our role as a human in that conversation and understand the very particular details, particularly in our professional service industry, where it is very high value conversations with very high caliber clients, and the outcomes are instrumental in your project work. Not just for you, but the next person who takes on the next piece of the work and the person after that as well. And that's what we do at Notive. So I don't know why the background is black, but I can talk to it. So just sharing a little bit about like where we are as a business. So the same way that hardware is hard, AI is hard as well. So we really look at our journey and any startup's journey as a 10-year or more project. And we really look at the idea of year 1 to 3, no one knows who you are. No one, especially with AI, you've got to get data. It's very different to, here's 3 uni graduates building an e-commerce system. They can have something up and running in a few days. But for AI, you need data. You need a product that people engage with. You then have to apply your algorithms, and then to create the science. And there's this cycle where that lets you improve your product. And you keep looping through this process. And at some point, it's just good enough for an innovator to bear with. And then you go to the next step and the next step. And your messaging about what you do early on, everyone knows that, a lot of AI is a bunch of humans behind the scenes to start with. We didn't go down that route, but it is that case where you've got to build up your data sets, you've got to build up the science, you've got to work out how to get that in a product, generally in an interface that is new, because these are new capabilities that have never existed in the world before. So as you continue through the first 1 or 2 or 3 years, you get into then year 4 to 6, roughly, and your competition and the incumbents in our space are notepads. People start to notice you. People start to understand, oh, this is different. You then get that little bit further along again, and then they start getting scared. They're like, oh, this is gonna mow my grass. This is going to disrupt what I do. And eventually, you overtake them, where you are now in this point where, hey, we're scaling up. You're a team of hundreds of people. And it's really important, I think, for any startup, but particularly AI startups, to understand this is a long journey. It's a long game, and really understand what battles are you fighting at any particular point in your stage of where you are as a company. And I would very much urge anyone to make sure you're thinking about this, and make sure that while you're going through this process, you have to make sure one thing, you stay alive, and generally that means don't run out of money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think you touched on a couple of really important things before we start this panel, and that is the reality of what it takes to do not only a startup, but a startup with some AI. So can you guys share a little bit about, the initial stage of your journey and, what first got you onto needing AI? Because you're all solving industry or relevant problems that are real. But what made you start with AI, and how did you start? Juliet.
Oh man, so much I could talk about on this. I guess, how did I start? I mean, I for years was kind of doing it, the old way, the traditional way. My job was to do hydrology with these sort of industry standard models. I remember actually talking to Ryan about it one day, about AI, and I didn't know much about AI at the time, and he said, it's going to disrupt all these industries. I think, it's going to disrupt flood engineering one day. And I was just like, no, AI could never do my job. That's ridiculous. And then we were prototyping in the early days about just this technology doing the hydraulic part of the computation simply more efficiently. We didn't, at first think we're going to build an AI company. But then as we went on, we saw this huge opportunity just given sort of the amount of data that we had and some of the uncertainties that exist within that data, and by using sort of machine learning presents this whole opportunity where you actually sort of eliminate that uncertainty. Maybe I can dig into that a little bit more, but I sort of came to this point where now I say AI is disrupting my job. This is disrupting the whole engineering industry as I knew it before, and we're doing things that, Rob will show me sort of the models he's doing and their performance, and it just blows my mind, because what he can do in a day was what I would do in 3 months. It's incredible. And so we sort of came to this decision really just looking at the scalability of the problem. So flood forecasting has always been done traditionally by, local government area, just very localized because it's so complex and so expensive to engage, consultants. Whereas then you look at industries such as take logistics or transport or rail operations that are going across the whole state of Queensland. They kind of can't afford to do it by location or source all this data from government organisations. They need scalability because their assets are covering large geographical areas. And so we saw to do this at scale, we're actually going to have to use machine learning because the time taken and the efficiency to be able to sort of deploy those models and have them kind of calibrate and self-learn is just a game changer in our industry and sort of the way, for example, the way we measure river height in Queensland and anywhere really is by height. We can't measure the flow and the velocity because that's complicated. And so what the engineers in the industry do, or the hydrographers, will go out and measure flood height continuously. And then they have a curve which they've developed over a few measurements in time where they've measured the velocity and the actual volumetric flow rate of the water. And then they have what's called a rating curve, which sort of, has a few points of data relating that. But there's so much uncertainty in the way that our recorded river height is translated to volumetric discharge, which would be needed to do a traditional, physics-based model. But when you introduce machine learning and AI, it presents an opportunity to actually train the model based on the observed data. So it's such eliminating some of the uncertainty. And so the opportunity it presents is just incredible.
Amazing. Chris, you touched on a little bit on why you started, but was it initially that you were like, oh, we're going to start with AI, this is what it's going to look like? Was it that straightforward, or what was your initial journey?
This is a funny story. So I was previously the co-founder of a very large company called BugCrowd, and so it was another scenario where I witnessed firsthand what is it like being in a large organization and how much communication matters. Obviously we work in the professional services sector and that's hugely valuable to them, but there's also the idea of in just any company that's growing where communication starts to become a bottleneck. And so when I got to the point, I said, okay, there's more value in me building this company to help my prior company. I actually stepped out of the company and put up a landing page. So I actually didn't build anything other than a page that said, invite this email and you'll get notes back. And it's the true, concierge / Wizard of Oz, the duck's feet under the water process. And I was inundated. I was hiding in don't tell the person I had a visa with at the time, but I was hiding in the phone booth, joining people's Zoom calls and go-to-meeting calls and just typing notes out. It was all me, just frantically putting, responding to the calendar invite and typing it all in. So for me, I wanted to prove first that there was absolutely a need and people would let something do this that they don't know in this process. And a majority of it was from professional services. People going, hey, this is great. I'll try it out. I'll do it. And that was the point. It was really clicked. It was like, there is a huge demand for this. And then went, okay, but this is not practical. Scaling this with humans will be very expensive. So you start to consider at the start the unit economics and okay, I can try to move some of this offshore, but there's a trust piece that comes along. So it's really looking at how do I prove the value and then what utility can I create early by building as little as possible. But looking at that, it became clear very early that in order to even continue down this path, we had to prove out the feasibility of some of the technologies. And that's when I started looking around and discovered Dr. Ian McCowan, my business partner, the CTO at Notive, who has 25 years in this space and ran the largest research project around this in the world. And it was like, okay, great, we need to talk. And then it went from there. And we defined, okay, there are certain technologies that we'll need. We need these 3 to even know if this type of product will be feasible. So then we went out and proved the first 3 and then wrapped that up into the simplest product we can, making sure that that product can get in front of these innovators and early adopters, and then we can cover off privacy and security needs because obviously, we're talking about, thousands and thousands of hours of people's crucial conversations for their business. So once proving that step of the basic technology, the basic need and security requirements and privacy requirements, then go, okay, cool, that version goes to market. And then what do we learn from that? And then the next layer, and then the next layer. And there's still things that we have as ideas that are still on a to-do list, and there's things that we are working on that aren't in our product yet, and there's a lot of like really new things that our customers are absolutely buzzing about that have freshly come out and are available in what we call our early access and beta programs. So we take a very particular approach, but you have to prove there's a need for it first, and then prove it's feasible, and then we actually go to implement.
Thank you, Chris. Great. Great, I'm just going to turn to you because obviously you've got the hardware side and then the software side. We've got a lot of startups that I know and some in residence at RCL who have embarked on the hardware first. What was Movis's approach, and what was the tie between the two and the complexity on selecting where do you invest your time, especially in the early days?
I think it's interesting to note that the Fit Machine that we had in the video is actually the second hardware product that Movis have produced. The first hardware product that Movis produced was a box about the size of a loaf of bread, and it was supposed to go on trains.
Right.
And so we were Brad at that stage was trying to work out how to help rail companies essentially manage not just maintenance of trains, but where they were and all that sort of business. And so that was the first piece of hardware that we'd actually prototyped. As part of the research around what he was doing at that point, or what he was hoping to do there, he discovered this 2 billion machines around the world that are typically just not very well maintained, use more electricity than they should. And all the existing means of putting a sensor on them or measuring them or monitoring were either too expensive, too complicated. They required huge amounts of expertise just to understand the information coming out of them. And so he went hunting for somebody that was familiar with the way these machines operate, electrical machines operate, and had some understanding of AI. And he found at that point our chief scientist, Dr. Paul Hanna, and he had spent a lot of time at Rolls-Royce with jet engines and had started to think about this problem as well. But one of the interesting things is that the cost associated with collecting enough data to provide the AI with something to work on was the real challenge. And so in order to solve the problem of ease of implementation or ease of deployment, and also the cost of having this device on a machine that typically has been considered not expensive enough, even though it might be critical, but maybe not expensive enough to, you might spend 3, 4, 5 times the amount of money on the cost of a machine on just instrumenting it, in days gone by. We had to come up with a solution or a piece of hardware that facilitated our AI appropriately, so gave it enough data, but was also cheap enough to manufacture, simple enough to install, and robust enough so that we didn't get them coming back every 5 days, maybe every 6 months to 3 years would be good. So we had to go down that path of thinking about, well, how do we solve that problem? And we couldn't find at that particular moment in time sensors that satisfied all of those requirements. We could find a sensor that would give us really good data, but it was really difficult to install and didn't provide the data in a way that suited our AI. They weren't robust enough, they were too expensive, all of those things. So we decided to use some expertise which come along from, again, from the University of Queensland, where John Scott, who'd been working with another startup doing, he was doing some weird printing thing, I can't remember what it was, but that was sort of wasn't moving as well as I'd hoped, and so he come along and started designing the hardware. And so the whole point of the hardware and the reason why we've come up with an end-to-end solution is because we had to provide a piece of hardware that was going to fit in with the requirements around that ease of installation, the ongoing cost, the robustness, but still able to provide us with data that could support the process that we wanted to have on the other side of the AI, which was helping people maintain and run their equipment more efficiently. So while it probably might not have been the greatest idea to embark on a hardware play, we did it, and it's actually pretty critical in that ease of use thing now, that we went down that path. So we sort of we buckled up and got on with it, and we've now got a product that we're shipping all over the world, a piece of hardware that we're shipping all over the world. People can put it on in 4 or 5 minutes onto a piece of equipment, and then within a few days you're starting to see real useful data coming out of our dashboard that you can actually act on to improve your business.
No, I think it's a great way to disrupt those industries where are a bit harder to get technology into. A lot of the startups I've seen are doing just that in the resources and the services industries, where it is hard to get to, so it makes sense.
And we have some really interesting conversations in the office, because we do have hardware people that, we in sort of like the platform side of things, we release once every 5 or 10 minutes. They release a little bit slower than that, so we're still winning.
Competition's on. Nice, thank you. So you guys have touched on a few of the challenges you've experienced, obviously, in building out your models. Chris, you mentioned the expectation for startups to have initially on embarking something like this, to expect it in the 10-year run. What are some of the things or tips that you guys can provide? Has there been a time where you've just gone, oh my gosh, we give up, we have to try something else? Or what kept you going, and how long did that take to get to the point where you could see some return?
Wow, I guess like so many tips we could give or have learned along the way. I think one of them is to keep in mind to sort of move quickly, and I think this is something we're still learning as a team. Like, I love that Chris mentioned that the first thing he did was put up a landing pad and said, I'll translate your meetings, and it was literally him in the background translating meetings, because until you put a product in the hands of a customer to use, to get feedback, to see it in action, to validate that market, with this stuff, as Chris already mentioned too, like it takes so long to build. Like, we're still developing product at FloodMap after raising seed funding. Like, it's very, very technical. You invest years in development, in the research and the product build, and so you do risk going too far down the line, where if you're not kind of putting it in the hands of customers for proof of concepts, pilots, like whatever you can to get that feedback, you sort of risk kind of losing touch with your customer on that journey. So that would be my advice, is sort of MVP and the cycle of continual development. Like, there will always be iteration. You'll get more data from sensors. You'll get kind of more feedback from customers for features. You'll have more time to train your models, but to keep in mind that iteration, sort of build, release, get feedback, build. Do you have any advice you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think Juliet said it really well, so I don't want to say the same thing. But it relates to any startup, but don't be too naive going in thinking you know everything about it. It really, like for any startup, and I work with the StartMate accelerator out of Sydney and Melbourne and now New Zealand. And the one thing I've observed in any startups, even coming from RCL, is that it takes 18 months to really work out what you're going to be when you grow up. So, make sure you're open going into it and understand that you have a hypothesis going in, and ultimately your business is 18 months of little bets. And you need to be able to look at it and go, what is our bet we're making right now? We're betting that a hardware device the size of a loaf of bread can fit on a train and do something, but you also have to be prepared to be able to come back and go, hey, people won't just let us record them all day. So we have to find a place where they will let us record, and that happens to be a meeting. Oh, guess what? There's a huge opportunity. There's 55 million of these every day. So make sure that when you go in, that you really understand you won't know who you are going to be later for at least about 18 months, and that's the sort of time frame I find. In the diagram I showed earlier, it's sort of like halfway through that first phase is when you really sort of work out who you are, and particularly with AI, it's at that point you've got basic product, you've got enough data to do something meaningful. You now have first versions of algorithms that do something that's okay, but it's not perfect yet. And you've got to work out, how do I run that in a product, and how do I make that usable and have value for a customer when it's not perfect yet, and then iterate from there. And you know, anyone going into any startup will quickly work out what we thought when we, you know, maybe it's a seed thing, or you jump out of your full-time job, and it quickly becomes a reality. It's like, oh, that's not quite as glamorous as we thought it might be. So be prepared to spend that 18 months, you know, discovering who you are going to be.
Thank you. Brady, did you have anything to add there?
Oh, I've always got something to add. One of the interesting things in the AI sort of space that we're in, particularly around industry, is we haven't tried to simplify the problem, but we've tried to identify a way to present the information to people or you know, people that run maintenance programs, people that run equipment, to present the information to them in a way that allows them to act. The problem is there's a whole heap of history around manufacturing of machines and how you maintain them and that. And so people always want to go back and look at, well, what's the measurement? You know, what did the sensor actually measure? And so we've spent, when did we start? 2015. So we've spent 5 years trying to get people to understand that they don't need to know that. We can help them without them having to have that expertise. And just the other day, we had one of our major customers in Canada come and say to us, because we'd actually we'd opened up a little bit of the behind-the-scenes data for a couple of customers just to see what happened. They come to us and they said, we don't want that, you know. Your AI gives us all we need, and we don't need that stuff anymore. And so that's the biggest turning point, one of the big turning points around that education process, when you're starting to use AI and starting to disrupt a little bit. You know, you've got to sometimes you've got to educate and bring people along for the ride, and that's been a real, I wouldn't say challenge is not the right word, but it's been a real part of the messaging that we've had to sort of change and adapt and adopt over the last 5 years.
That's a great segue. So thinking about the change management when you're talking to your clients or customers, some of the things, Chris, you said earlier about people listening to you and the ethics that go along with AI, or, you know, the sentiment around robots are going to take over my job. What are some of the things that you guys have encountered, and how did you overcome it when you're trying to manage that change and the fear around AI, if you've had it?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, it's such an innovative thing, and not everyone understands it yet. Like, it is a huge learning curve. Like me, when I first was hearing about it, I was like, super like, what is this? Like, no, it's not going to disrupt my job. Like, but once you learn more about it and what it is, you sort of become more comfortable with it, and that it's not, you know, that all the robots are going to take over. It's really just a useful tool to help build efficiencies in industries to complement the technical understanding that already exists within those industries. And so we've certainly found, like, a lot of customers are so interested in it's about building trust. Like, so many customers are like, oh, but yeah, well, we want to see it in action. We want to see it live. We want to do a proof of concept, to do a historical simulation to prove that your model actually works, or, you know, like, do a pilot to see it in action. And so part of the way we've really built trust with them is to go through that process of doing a historical simulation, say, okay, here's a flood that occurred, you know, in Queensland in 2020, or in Cyclone Debbie, and simulating what happened with our model, and then overlaying it with the observed flood that actually occurred, and that's been a really good way to build trust, and people have been like, oh wow, hey, this innovative approach actually might have something to it, because it's really about taking them along the journey, as Grady said.
Chris, I'm sure you've got some stuff to share.
I would just, similar story. You need to make sure that what you put in front of people, it works well enough for what you're delivering. So there's a lot of things. We have about 16 different signals that we can pull from a conversation to do with the way things sound, and then what that means, where people talk and don't talk, and when people talk over each other. And we could go in and tell you everything about, like, women get spoken over here and men get spoken over there. People aren't ready for that. So similar story, you have to make sure that you know, like, it's like typical change management, really. You have to understand, like, what is the problem going to cause when you now let people start understanding what's actually happening in the scenario of what we do. So, we've deliberately made sure that we've gone out, and when you open our product, you can see a transcription of the whole conversation. We don't actually want to show a whole transcription. It's not useful. There's 15 pages of text. That's going to go away. But people have to feel comfortable enough with what you're doing that you can show them just enough so they now get comfortable, and then you can start introducing the layers on top of it, and then you can make that go away. And they know, hey, it's there if I want it, but realistically, hey, yeah, here is this automatic topic detection within a real conversation, and within each topic, it's then saying, Chris and Pauline spoke about this, and then Pauline presented about this, and here are the actions that were commented on within this section where you talked about a glow-in-the-dark button on a speech recognition microphone when you're building a TV. So there's these layers where it's like, that's the ultimate utility, but if you put that in front of someone on day one, they're going to go, whoa, what's this? That's not what I wanted. So it's really building enough and seeing where do they read the transcript, where do they play it back, what is the information in those points, in order to be able to understand their needs even better, to then say, okay, now let's put the layers on top. Let's introduce the things that are even more valuable, but the customer is now comfortable with the result that you're giving them through the process.
Awesome. So taking them on the journey with you at their pace. Knowing your client, knowing your customer, critical. So let's spin it a bit more positive now. So you guys are all working in different industries. What are some of the jobs and the talent that you're seeing come through? Obviously, there's new roles that are coming through on the back of AI. What are some of the things that you're seeing that excites you about the future of talent pools in tech?
Yeah, I guess, we thought that we were the only people that had ever advertised for a hydrology flood data scientist, but then I actually saw another company advertised for that same role like yesterday, and so that excites me, just this fact that 10 years ago, that would never have been a job that I could apply for, but people graduating and coming and studying, environmental engineering and water resources, or doing their PhD in hydrology and water resources, are actually learning machine learning and AI techniques to calibrate models as part of their degrees. So this is actually being sort of started to integrate with the whole education system, which people are graduating with this new set of skill sets, and these careers which you would have never thought of 10 years ago are being advertised. So a true flood nerd, that's what excites me.
Grady, and anything from you or Chris?
Please.
I think one of the interesting things I've seen over the last couple of years, particularly around the data science area, is that maybe a few years ago, data science was sort of, if you put an ad out for someone with data science, you get a lot of application for people that are really excellent at Excel or Power BI or something like that. It really has, data science has really leapfrogged that sort of perception now. And the amazing, the number of people that we have working for us that have PhDs and master's degrees and that in mathematics and have leveraged that into a data science career is just amazing. Like I've seen that as just a change over the last few years, and I think it makes it not only much easier for us or more confident when we go out to the market to find people, but that we're going to get somebody useful. But I think it's just feeding, particularly around places like Brisbane, the number of AI startups and the amount of people that are able to contribute in these fields is it's just increasing significantly. But more importantly, people understand it a little bit more, and when we put a job ad in, we're much more confident of getting somebody that can actually do what we ask. So it's been a slow process, I think, from our perspective 5 years ago when Brad went out looking for someone with some unique sort of expertise that, while Paul has a lot of unique, talents and lots of experience now, we've been able to bring in other people to support him. And he always says that, and you guys might agree or disagree with this, but work with AI is, from the research perspective, is scalable. The more people you have at it, the quicker you can move on. You can move on things, and so that's really going to be helpful to us as we move to our next sort of iterations of our AI.
Awesome.
I'd like to suggest something a little controversial. that I'm sure Amazon can help with. But there is actually a lot of great sort of data science, AI, ML, what's the difference between each? I'm sure it's debatable. Talent coming out of both Brisbane, Queensland, and then national schools. There's some great computational linguistics subjects coming out of like New South Wales and Victoria. Hopefully more up here in Queensland soon, please, UQ and QUT.
We do GIST program. Where the GIST program, it's all about that. 5 schools signed on, ACS with Queensland Government working through more tech in schools.
Thank you. I'll suggest one thing, and can I ask a question for everyone too?
Please.
But, when you're a startup, you can't hire 30 people to do one job. You have to worry about budgets. You have to worry about headcounts. You have to worry about, startups are hard, which means it's an emotional journey. And 80% of the work as a founder is emotional support, let alone dealing with customers and these other pieces. You add more people to make the job easier, but it also makes it harder. And I say that because we've doubled our team size in the last 6 months. But one thing I'd love to see from all sorts of schools, but particularly with the data science aspect, is having people who are a little more rounded graduating. So it's one thing to develop a great algorithm in a Python notebook, which is, for anyone who isn't technical enough, it's a tool you can use to develop data science things in Python very quickly, or any Python code quickly, and demonstrate the value of it. But there's still a lot more work to then take that and have a production-ready API or background job, or there's probably a bunch of acronyms that Amazon, I know them, I just don't want to sound like a nerd. SQS, and then there's notification, SNS, all these things that can then make it all glue together and actually be part of something that can be developed and used as part of a platform team. But what I'm seeing is that there are people who have that ability because either they have done data science and taken that on themselves, or they are really good at that and have learned just enough data science. I'd love to see Amazon working with more local schools to have people graduating who are truly startup ready, where they can take a concept of an algorithm, prove it out as a first version, and actually have it then running on Fargate, or there's a bunch of more Amazon technologies available, and actually show that they can then deploy and create live working APIs that can then be utilized within startups. So, you're starting to get people where it's not this person does a bit, then that person does a bit, and then that person does a bit, and now it's finally something that's available. Particularly early stage, and I'm saying this for people in the audience where they may be a 3-person team. They can't hire 3 more people to get an algorithm in production. They've got space for half a person, and it's going to be hard enough finding that grad that wants to join their startup, and let alone having someone that can actually do all these pieces and get things in production. And I think there's great opportunities to do this. I know that PopGun have a great initiative where they're bringing people in, and Mawson Labs, where they're actually teaching people up who are show great promise on either side, and making sure when they finish their initial projects that they have the ability to do all of this. I'd like to see that type of thing done more, whether it's a vocational offering that Amazon can do, or the universities themselves can actually apply and do it. Because I think Queensland has something really special in our AI representation. I moved back to Queensland for the program that Mark described earlier, not just because the program was there, but also I came and sat in this room and I was like, wow, Brisbane, there is as many people here as a Palo Alto AI meetup, and the people, when they present, the content was just as good. So I'd really like to see Queensland continue to push itself as an AI hub, and it's not just a leader within Australia, but within the world, for the type of talent and application that can come of these amazing technologies from great people in a state that is, in my opinion, the best state in Australia to live in. Anyway, rant over.
No argument here. And I like how you've committed AWS/Mark to lunch, and also improved curriculum and outcomes for our education system with IT. Juliet.
Totally agree. If I could add something just to that, we're a similar size team to Chris's team, which is a lot bigger than maybe some early stage startups, but we are so resource constrained. Everyone at FloodMap is doing at least 3 jobs, and that's just the way it has to be. Like our data scientists are building models, but they're also, working on the data pipelines to feed those models and learning how to deploy them, Dockerize them and deploy them on AWS or whatever it might be. Plus a lot of emotional support. I need a lot of that. And what we've seen is that I think the most valuable people, because we have had applications before from just, a straight up data scientist, but have to agree, when you're trying to do flood modeling and data science, there's just so much overlap of skills, plus all the, the DevOps and the software engineering to support the data feeding into those models. The more diverse sets of experience you can have, the better. And that's where I guess we've been so lucky that the people that we've had haven't necessarily just studied data science. They've come into it from, the hydrology, water resources side, or the coastal engineering side, or the chemical engineering side. And so some of that is maybe a bit self-taught, but that's more valuable to us than someone with a very siloed experience. So yeah, I love this idea of AWS getting in and providing amazing talent coming out of the universities with those skills, built in around other industry experience. That would be amazing. Super keen.
Well, there you go. So sorry, AWS.
And if only they could find a venue that would sponsor to be able to run these programs on the weekends or evenings.
Yes, like the one we're sitting in, maybe. So thank you so much. We unfortunately, really, we could talk all day, but we are out of time and we're leading towards the end of our session. I would love to thank you, Grady from Movis, Juliet from FloodMap, and Chris from Notive. You guys have imparted some wise words and shared your journey, and it's truly appreciated. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Leanne Kemp, our amazing Chief Entrepreneur of Queensland, over and CEO of Everledger, onto the stage.
Thank you. I don't know if I should face this way. It feels weird to have my back to you. Does that work on the angle for everyone? Is that okay? I wrote on that side. You're okay. I mean, this side's good too. I wrote a few words. I thought, of course, having the closing words of today. Thank you. It was so great to have such an interactive panel and bringing up some of those very key and critical engagement pieces and commitments from the giants that are sitting in the room today, and even universities. Great to see UQ here as well. It's a common psychological phenomenon that you repeat any word enough times and it eventually loses all meaning. Like a disintegrated, soggy tissue into a phonetic nothingness. I certainly have experienced that myself in the blockchain space, and arguably the phrase artificial intelligence somewhat fell apart in this way a little while ago as well. But the reality is AI is everywhere right now, and it's said to be powering everything from your TV to your toothbrush, and certainly I do have a smart toothbrush, but never have the words themselves had such hollowness. And it really shouldn't be this way, which is why initiatives like the AI Hub right here in Queensland and the commitment with AWS and our universities is critical. And while the phrase of artificial intelligence is unquestionably and undoubtedly misused in some sectors, the technology itself is doing more than ever before, both for good and for bad. It's being deployed in healthcare and warfare. It's helping people make music and books. It's scrutinising your resume, judging your credit worthiness, and tweaking the photos that you take on your phone. And in short, it's making decisions that affect our everyday life, whether we like it or not. Everledger, my company, began our journey in artificial intelligence in 2014 when I've been fortunate enough to be with Google X year upon year. And it was in the very early stages of TensorFlow that I recognised that the world was reliant upon the human thought patterning to grade gemstones. Diamonds and rubies and sapphires were really driven in its value by the opinion of those that had a trained eye. And there was no reason why, with the rise of machine vision technology, that we couldn't bring together incredibly smart algorithms and marry up both the power of man and machine. I stand here today with a company that has about 110 people that is really driven in data science. I think that UI is the new, voice is the new UI of the platforms of the world, and so too is machine vision when we think about the intelligence that it brings. So where do we stand right now with artificial intelligence? After many years of headline announcements, the next big breakthrough, we're still waiting for it to come. And some experts even think that we've reached a plateau. But that's not really an impediment to progress, which is why commitments in programs like we have here are critical to this new decade that we've begun. On the research side, as we know, there are huge numbers of avenues to explore with both existing knowledge, and on the product side, we've only really seen the tip of the algorithmic iceberg. There are two great people that I'm connected to, and one is Kai-Fu Lee, who's a venture capitalist and a former AI researcher, and he describes the current moment as the age of implementation. And I tend to agree with him, one where the technology is starting to spill out of the lab and into the real world. There's also another VC, Benedict Evans, who's a strategist, and he compares machine learning to relational databases, a type of enterprise software where, of course, many companies made their fortune in the 90s and revolutionised entire industries. And we're seeing that opportunity today. But we're not here right yet. We're starting to get there. The success of modern AI is less due to the breakthrough in new techniques and more to the vast amounts of data that we can gather and harvest and marry that with the computational power that is available. Now, personally, I use AI in my everyday living as a human, as a citizen, but also in my business. And I'm also concerned about how humans use AI. Machine learning algorithms are often thought of as black boxes, and the less effort in making sure that we pinpoint the specifics of the solution of our algorithms, then the more danger zones we walk into. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are tools, and they can be used right now in the right way, or unfortunately even in the wrong way, just like everything else. It's the way that we're using the tool that should concern us most, and the methods within themselves. You know, human greed and human unintelligence scare me far more than artificial intelligence. Yet the manner in which AI systems has unfolded has major implications for society as a whole. So bringing a consciousness to the AI hub is critically important today. It matters how policy issues are addressed, how ethical conflicts are recognised, how legal realities are resolved, and how much transparency is required in AI and data analytics solutions. Human choices about software development affect the way in which decisions are made and the manner in which they are integrated into organisational routines or even industry trade systems. Exactly how these processes are executed needs to be better understood by everyone because they will have substantial impacts on the general public and the foreseeable future. AI may well be a revolution in human affairs and become the single most influential human innovation in history. And I'm glad that I'm on the right side of history making that happen. Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Leanne, and what a wonderful way to end our session today. Thank you again to our panellists, and thank you to the audience who have joined. We hope to see you at the next event, and keep following the AI Hub to hear about some more, and of course our friends at AWS. Thank you.